Yay!
We're live on all the things.
Yes.
Yay! Hello!
Oh my gosh.
Yay!
We're back.
We're doing
I feel
it.
like it's been so long since
We're
I've
back
done
from
this.
outer
It's
space.
been
It
so
actually really has
long.
been. It's been a minute.
Friends and fans, welcome Shane back.
Hashtag fan.
So
It's good to be back.
it is so good to be back here at Hot Gas. We are very excited to see all of you. As
Our
Ryan-
hot goslings.
Great.
I'm not going to stop until Ryan Gosling.
Truly
Yeah.
relentless.
I think that's super fair. We're going double time today, so we've got Facebook here, and we got Instagram over here.
Instagram
So-
right there.
Tell us which angle looks better.
Down, I'm telling you, chins down and out.
Okay.
So
So
when
with our
make
chins,
all of your angles look good, we know. Everybody knows.
That's not
trying to,
your
like-
real name.
Everyone is like looking at
I'm like,
glamorous.
wait, what?
all right, friends, we need to really focus in on the topic
Yeah,
of the
cool.
day, which is cocks.
Cox,
Cock
cock,
talk.
cock.
Cock
Hashtag
Talk,
Cock Talk.
episode 10.
Mhm.
So this episode is inspired by our last conversation, which was about body positivity, and some of the conversations that we've been having in the office, but also with students about masculinity and maleness and sexuality and all those intersections in between.
Mhm.
And we've been seeing a lot of really awesome body positive stuff online about vulvas and vaginas. And we wanted to see if we could figure out how to demystify penises and rewrite and diversify the scripts that we are seeing
Mhm.
about penises. And we were going to get a little personal and maybe a little graphic. So I wanted to see if you folks had any ground rules you wanted to set before we dive
Yeah.
in.
Sure.
We're going to be talking about cocks and dicks and penises and phallocentrism and
Mhm.
all that fun stuff. So get ready for that. We're going to talk about cocks a lot.
Yep.
B, some might say this is not safe for work. So
If you work in an office, it's not
obviously
this one.
not our office.
We're feeling very safe at work right now.
We're pretty cool about it. But if you're sitting on the train or
Hi, Olivia.
hey Olivia,
See you, girl.
if you're sitting on a train or in your cubicle, you better throw some headphones in.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And Ron, any thoughts for you?
Yes, I always have so many thoughts. So I would say, just to be aware of the language that we're using, that we're going to try as hard as possible to use gender neutral language, or as gender neutral as one can be when talking actively about genitalia. But a lot of the time, we're going to say folks with penises or people with penises instead of men, just because not all people that have penises feel like they're men, and not all men feel like have penises. So
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
yep.
Cool. So, favorite opening question that I ask every single time. Why are we having this conversation? Why?
Who first?
Who first?
You go.
Nobody fight me.
Yeah. Come at me, bro. Well, I think it's we're in a society that is super phallocentric. That there's all
Yeah.
of this. There's talk about penises everywhere. We all are very aware that penises exist. You see any a big
Right. building
and you're it's a dick, you know. And I think that
Yeah.
considering how much we talk about penises, we don't really have any productive conversations about penises or any real conversations. When you see or hear about penises, it's usually it's silly, right? It's the butt of a joke, or it's kind of gross and aggressive.
Yeah.
It's if you look at movies, right? When was the last time you saw a naked man in a movie? Saw a naked dick, which is who knows,
Never.
right? Yeah.
I
But
think of one scene in Forgetting Sarah Marshall,
yes, and that was such a big deal. Yeah.
and it was a joke.
Yeah.
It was not
Yeah.
sexy and seductive. He was
Yeah, shaking it
Yeah.
about. Yeah. But the number of times that we see breasts in a movie, it's that's
Literally
it's,
Every
Yeah.
movie.
all the
Finding
time.
Nemo.
Finding Nemo with boobs.
It's funny because I say sometimes people are as useful as tits on fish, but apparently
There are some tits and fish. You didn't watch it.
or even the language that we use though it's so violent, right? It's you're a dick, suck a dick, eat a bag of
Yeah.
dicks. It's always really aggressive. And so there's no real healthy, productive conversation about penises in a comprehensive manner.
and not only just about how penises exist in the world, but there's so little conversation about pleasure and what it means
Oh
to
my God,
interact.
Oscar.
Hey, Oscar.
Hey, Oscar.
What it means to interact
The
with
weirdest
penises
ogre.
and people with penises,
Mhm.
and they're just sort of there but not there. We talk about them, but we don't. I have many theories that we're going to touch on later.
Yeah.
Yes, don't say touch on.
I also, I think you're right though. When we say you're being a dick or eat a bag of dicks, definitely guilty of telling someone to eat a bag of dicks. I've started calling people assholes instead of dicks because everyone has an asshole, and then it's a non-gendered bodily insult that you can throw at someone.
Yeah.
You're happy medium.
Yeah.
So, question for the folks in the room or online who have penises. I feel like as somebody who didn't grow up with one, like I felt in the dark about my own genitalia, but it like never occurred to me that that might be the same for people with different genitalia than myself. But the more that I like realized that like the only reason I know the names of like parts of penises is because jokes and like having brothers. So like how much did you actually get told about what your penis does or why or how and how to keep it healthy?
Yeah, like honestly, not a lot of information. I would say that like it's oh no, it's okay. I was like not okay, but like it's I think that like what's interesting is that like it's the whole, it goes back to privilege, right, and power. But, like when you're like the group that is like in power and control and privilege, you become the norm, you become the default, and like if you're the default, it's just assumed that you know how this thing works. And then I think factoring in the fact that like penises are external genitalia, so physically just out there, it's just assumed like, oh, it's easy enough, like it gets hard to do stuff to it, you pee from it, whatever. And I think that like there's not any assumption that you need more conversation than that. And then I think that the conversation becomes even trickier when you deviate from like the norm, right? And so like including things about like general ability or like race, things like that. There's really not any like healthy or helpful and productive information because it's
out there. Play with it.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
You know, it's really funny. If you think about like all the like women's magazines, like Cosmo and all of it is like, here's how to like pleasure your man. So like A, super straight. B, all about like, here are all these things you can do to penises to make them do things. And I want to write an article that's like, I mean, A, that sets it up in a way that like women in that context or people who are buying those magazines tend to have more access to language about penises and male pleasure. Because you're not going to read, like men's health is not like, here are all the things to do to your penis. Because it's assumed that people just know how that works. But all those articles, I want to be like, do you want to know how to please your man? Just ask.
Yeah, right? And it's fast because I think it like creates like a really weird power dynamic though, right? Like it's in those same women's magazines, I'd be like willing to wager, like I don't really read them, but like I'd be willing to wager that there's like not a lot of things about like, here's how you can have more pleasurable sex for you. Right. It's like how do you pleasure the man? And it like creates this like you said, it's like very heteronormative, very straight, and assuming that it's just all about them and their pleasure and like the female like gifting pleasure onto the man and him just like kind of laying back and accepting it, which isn't really like, doesn't sound like the type of like sex that we want people to have.
Well, that's so much of the sex that we're seeing, right? Is that like sex is over in hetero situations. Sex is over when the man comes. So like women's pleasure is
barely factored.
Yeah, and it's all focused on like how to make your man come or how to like, especially in hetero relationships for sure.
And it's fascinating because like those articles too, like it's like because you're not seeing them like in these like male magazines, it's not really emboldening like the men that like are reading these types of things to even think about like what gives me pleasure, right? Like it all ends at my penis. My penis is the thing, but you've got a whole body, right? Like there's so many other like, potential sources of pleasure. But that conversation isn't really had. Like the number of partners I've had that I was like, hey, like, what are you into? Like what feels good? Like, do you have any fetishes? Anything we should do? And they're like, I don't know, like my penis, like touch my genitals. And it's like, I was like, but like what else though? Like, what do you want done to them? Like how?
Well, the
like,
largest sexual organ is your skin.
Yeah.
And the most powerful one is your brain.
I was like, your butt? That's
no, but like all of this, you know, you're right that like there's, it's very phallocentric and being able to say like including more skin and brain into
and
the
that's
conversation
how
about pleasure.
human sexuality works. Like I think this phallocentrism really limits the narrative for people with penises too to not explore themselves and not explore themselves with partners, and like it sort of sells everybody in that interaction really short.
Yeah, it's super reductive.
Yeah.
You are your penis.
Yeah. And I like want more for that.
Yeah.
For people.
I think it's fascinating because even like the fact that we like penis is like one of the many words for penis is like your manhood, right? And so it's like so deeply tying like you being a man to having a penis. Which is like just inherently like pretty problematic.
Right, and can get like kind of scary and dangerous pretty quickly too. And so I think we really need to diversify that script.
Well, I think, go ahead. Jumping in like as a trans guy, right? Like what does it say about my masculinity and like my relationship to penises? You know, and like my penis is big and it never goes soft because I paid for it. And you know, there are certainly layers in masculinity and masculine presenting people, and then a separate layer of, especially for trans masculine folk, about like what relationship do you want to have with penises, because you know, mine's not attached and I get to choose the size and the color and the shape, and how do we, like, coming into this like very phallocentric, this is your manhood, like what if I don't want to pack, what if I don't want to have sex with you know, a non-attached penis, like what does that say about my masculinity as a trans man? You know,
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it seems like we're sort of trying to get, like, we need to sort of separate
Mm-hmm.
the penis from identity. Like, it's part of something that you can celebrate for your body, but like doesn't make you who you are, kind of thing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Or it does. It sometimes it does.
I mean, I think I think you said manhood, and it made me think of that. But like, there's no other body part that we identify so strongly as being like representational of the whole.
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
it was really interesting.
Like even vulvas don't have that same power.
Yeah, there's like a totally different. We could talk about a totally different set of words that we use to describe that body part that like say all different sorts of messages about people who identify as women, which is really interesting that we do that. So switching gears a little bit, when we're talking about people with penises, what sort of pressures, specifically with their penises, do you feel like they face?
Size.
Like,
Right?
What?
Yeah, it's like, because it's like so in your face, if you will, size. Like there's such a concern about size, and I think that like we as humans, like as a social species, that we do so much comparing ourselves to our peers. You know, it's like from a very young age, you're like at the pool or at the beach or like in a locker room, and you like look around, and you're like, oh cool, like I just physically look different, and so immediately you're like, am I normal? Is this okay? Like, is that all right? Which, you know, can be hard. It's a hard conversation to have and to like to think about.
Yeah.
There's a lot of comparing, and I think there's a lot of, am I good enough? Am I enough? Based on the size. Right. And of course, then there's like the whole like showers versus growers. Right. Like people who have like larger flaccid penises that like don't get much bigger when they have an erection versus like people who are smaller. With flaccid, whose penises get very large when they get erected. So I'm sure there's this like, but it gets bigger later.
Well, it's fascinating, because you hear that like people being like, oh, like don't worry, like I'm a grower, not a shower, and it's like, but like, but don't worry, right? Like just like in general, don't worry. And thought, but like it's fast. It's like in the world in general. Oh no, we just paused for some people. Heard.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Right.
So
we hope we come back.
Yeah, hopefully everyone hears us. If not. Sorry about that. What? No. Okay.
Aranda's so good at attending to our fans' needs.
I know. I just want to make sure that everyone's heard.
I think it's okay. I think we're okay.
Sorry, Oscar.
Yeah, sorry, Oscar. Hope you hear us later. But what was I talking about?
We're talking a little bit about size anxiety. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and like that, like in the world in general, like most penises, like the average size is about like 5-ish inches, like give or take.
Hard.
Soft. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, hard. Thank you. That's a good question. Which is fascinating. Like that statistic.
In here.
Yeah, like that statistic in and of itself is fascinating, right? Because like when we talk about like size, like we're like not at all talking about like girth or like width. Like we're always like talking just about length, which is like a weird measurement. Because like the girth is what's gonna like in many cases like really like affect what that experience is and the sensation.
I mean, we also have a word for penises that are wider than they are tall.
Yeah, chode, right?
Yeah. Chode. Yeah.
And then it's fascinating, right? Because like so like average penis size, like in relation to like other genitalia and orifices, like makes sense, right? So like the average anus or vagina can accommodate like a penis that's like about 5-ish inches, and so like that makes sense. So like something that's like 7 or 8 inches might be painful for someone that has a cervix, right? For example. And then going past that, like looking if you're like having sex again with like someone with a vulva with a vagina, that orifice, right? Like the pleasure of the nerve endings, right? Or like mostly within like the exterior, like a couple of inches, and like the clitoris has a lot of nerve endings there.
Not
and
even interior, it's on the outside.
And so like size isn't super important for that, and so it's really, really interesting that like we put so much like stock and pressure in size and like size related things when like size doesn't actually really like matter.
Like,
in terms of like pleasure and like being a good lover, like you may or may not be a good lover because you have a big penis, like it doesn't really matter.
The only thing I could think of if size matters is if having a larger, longer penis is like easier for fertility.
I don't know.
That's like less distance for the sperm to swim to get into the cervix is literally the only
like
thing.
Biologically advantageous reason.
The only reason I can think that like having a bigger penis might be better.
Like quote unquote better. I'm gonna do some research on that and maybe put it on the blog because like I don't know if there's like an actual advantage to having a larger one.
I would surmise probably not. But that's the only thing I can think of.
I will say if it's painful for someone with a vulva to have sex, then like that's probably not great for.
Right.
But again, there are ways to like if your a partner does have a large penis, there are ways to like accommodate and make that still pleasurable if you want to have penetrative sex. So maybe there are ways around it. But
I also think it's really important to point because like we're talking a lot about this like penis anxiety in relationship to like people wearing their penis like isn't large enough.
Yeah.
But like having like spoken to people who are very well endowed, and it's like really a source of stress for them for that exact point. They brought up that like I have a friend that got naked, was like about to have sex with someone, and she looked at his penis and laughed, and she's like, I don't know where that's gonna go. She's like that it's not gonna get in me.
Yeah.
And he's like that happens to me all the time. Like it's really hard and really stressful. And so like
I mean, you never want anyone to laugh at your genitalia.
No matter what it looks like. Yeah. So we've been talking about size a lot, but are there other things, especially in the relationship to the conversation we're having about body positivity and the different things that might affect the script for what bodies are supposed to look like? Are there things that affect what we think penises are supposed to look like? Other factors?
I think like circumcision is like one of those as well, right? It's that like I think there's people that think that like circumcised penises are like cleaner or are prettier or like better for those reasons. But then some people think that it's like cruel to like snip like skin off of a baby, right? Or like even like just like unnecessary. So then leading into like uncircumcised arguments, like people say that like because of sensation, right? That like that just like there's more physical sensation with an uncircumcised penis, so they're like, oh, that's better, right? So that there's really I would
say as someone who purchases my penises, most like dildos or strap-ons and most soft packers, so things that aren't used for sex but like sit in your pants well, are circumcised. Like the majority.
And I'm wondering,
I think very recently people have started making uncircumcised.
I'm wondering if it's like a
prosthetic penises.
like circumcised is considered the norm still, and like that's what the ideal penis looks like, or is it because I'm wondering why that happened.
What's the deal with hair?
Oh, pubic hair.
Interesting. What do you mean?
Well,
because I think that like that narrative is changing a bit, if I'm understanding the question correctly. So I think for a long time it was that like dudes had hair, and then like in like the 2000s with like Queer Eye and the term manscaping and all that. But like now like trimming is like more and more of the thing. Yeah. But
you're asking about like idea, like what's our like stereotypical penis?
I mean, I think hair is an interesting conversation. I think I was trying to get at like are there other identity factors that like affect how people feel about their penises?
I just want to like jump in and say like your other identities, right? Because I think like race is a really big one too. For
sure.
I think like there's so much narrative about like races that have bigger or smaller penises and things like that. And that can be really, really hard, right? Because like as a person that like is like hearing those messages and internalizing it, that like if you do fall into that stereotype, then like you feel like you're being like objectified or exoticized or fetishized. And then if you don't, you feel like you're just like not good enough and feel like it's like hard for you to perform in the way that people are expecting of you. And that's
well, and again, and this is for a lot of people, this is something that there's a lot of value and a lot of judgment and a lot of like intrinsic value based on this thing that you have no control over. Like you can't will yourself to have a bigger or smaller penis. Like that for most people, like that's the card you're dealt, and there's so much value placed in this thing that we have zero control over. What a mess.
I know. It's messy. And I think
it's messy.
Well, it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about this as I now have more access to men's restrooms. And now that I'm passing more, and people aren't looking like I have 17 heads, which was imagine this face walking into the women's room. That was very fun. Before I was passing as a dude. But thinking about how private restrooms are. And like urinating and defecating is so private. Like there's no way you'd walk into a women's room and there's just a row of toilets with no stalls. But you walk into a men's room and there's just a wall of urinals. And this thing that is very private, right? Peeing is a very private act. There's jokes that like girls pee together, but you're not like sitting on each other's laps to pee, right? And so there's this thing that is very private that is being exposed in a very public way in men's rooms. And you're not supposed to look, but you kind of look. And so it's this, I'm still trying to suss out, in my brain, this extremely public-private line and how that works out as it relates to phallocentrism. And like, of course, there's a lot of insecurity on penises because they're out all the time because that's the way that we've socially constructed restrooms.
Right. And we've decided that penises aren't sexual when it's around other men, and we've decided that all men have penises, therefore they can all pee in a urinal. And so there's all of these things built into this one place where we're just ready to urinate.
That just
really
blurs
good
the
point.
public-private line in such a big way.
Yeah.
Also, just so we're aware, we're like nearing 20 minutes.
Oh my, we've talked about penises for almost 20 minutes. I have one more conversation, or one more question to add to the conversation before we end it. Do you think in this moment, culturally, it is okay that we celebrate penises? Are we allowed to?
Yes, asterisk. Like, yes, but.
Explain the asterisk.
I think that in the way that we currently have been doing it, no. I think that like when it becomes like more true to life and comprehensive and like healthy and like a word they used for it earlier was like subversive. I think that feels right. Because like so for so long, for example, like vaginas, vulvas, like any type of like female sexuality body part was like hidden and shamed. So like you'd see like Michelangelo, right? Like make something and like there's a penis out. Whereas like any like the Venus de Milo, right? She's like kind of hiding it. It's like always like hide your vagina. And so I think that like then you start
the statue of David.
Yeah.
It's just like
it's just like out. Yeah. And so I think that like it made sense. It was really important for women to like find this way to like really like show like
reclaim
themselves and
space,
like reclaim it. But also I think part of why it's like good and great and real is that it shows like a wide variety. And I think that's kind of like what like penis art like needs to be as well. Like needs to like show like a true variety. So like instead of just like showing art with like huge veiny dicks that are like rock hard, I think it has to be like some like really small ones and like flaccid and like different shapes and sizes and curvatures and like all these things. So
the moment they make penis art and it's just like a penis emerging from like a bed of roses, just like waving at me,
there's
I will buy
it
and put it in my apartment.
I was gonna say, let us know if you've got any penis fan art.
We'd love to see it.
I was gonna sort of echoing on Arunde's point, right? Like nobody complains about getting an unsolicited vulva pic, but we hear so much about unsolicited dick pics, which is a separate conversation. But I think there's a way to celebrate penises and explore this part of masculinity, right? Echoing that not every man is a penis and not every person with a penis is a man, but ways to explore penises and celebrate them in a way that separates it from the ego and from having one's entire identity tied up in this body part. I would like to see that art. So having these conversations around masculinity and what we choose to highlight and using penis art as a way to explore that, I think could be really cool.
I think that's a fun challenge.
I do not want to see any more
fun
dick pics. I spend enough time on critique my dick pic.
Which we'll mention in the blog
We'll put it in our blog
post.
post. We're big fans. But I think that's like a really good place to wrap it up. It's with a challenge to our viewers to send us maybe messages on Facebook with some subversive dick art if you've seen it, and some questions that you have about how we can talk about and celebrate penises in a way that flips the script and diversifies the narrative.
I love it.
Yeah.
Be more than our body parts.
Yeah.
What was the hashtag?
Oh, it was like
hashtag give dicks a chance.
They
need a chance. So with that, we're going to sign off. We will follow this up with a blog post with some links and some more questions, but we want to hear from you, and tune in next month for our next Talk Goss.
Awesome.
Goss.
Thanks, Gosling.
Thanks.
I'm glad that we made Goslings happen.